long before there actually was any kind of Ethernet, ARPANET, internet, or today's Wi-Fi systems. And it was going to be capable of radio transmissions, but so much more. It was going to literally be able to power people's homes from remote distances. It's a pretty notorious story. People know about Tesla's genius, know how he was kind of the competition between Edison's direct current, Nikola Tesla's alternating current, and a lot of kind of black, harsh propaganda on the part of Edison and a lot of intimidation really got in the way of Tesla's projects and kept him in the shadows. But Tesla did manage to attract funding from J.P. Morgan, I think the Westinghouse family, and other really big players for his Wardenclyffe Tower wireless energy project. But when Marconi came out with wireless radio, which was actually based on Tesla's patents, the funding fell apart. The tower ended up being only partially constructed. I think he got to do some initial testing, but it was never complete and it just never came to fruition.
I mean, you can clearly see here, if you type in Wardenclyffe, that's the original building you'll see in that picture. I mean, I know there's a tree there in front of the stack, but that's the building. And if you see down here in front, I'll try to see, there's big bars right here, guys, sorry, but do you see that red bench right there? Orient yourself to that. Now look directly behind it at that kind of octagonal cement shape that's around in a circle behind this statue. Can you see that outline there? That's where the original tower stood. And I believe it was pulled down and scrapped in 1917 to pay off his debt on the place after, you know, J.P. Morgan pulled the funding and all that. But it used to stand right there.
And so what was perhaps Tesla's greatest dream, or the greatest one that the public seems to know about, of producing basically free or very cheap electricity for entire populations, maybe even around the globe, was pretty much shelved for a solid century, and Tesla's name was largely buried in the history books. A lot of what he worked on, well, was frankly just stuck in his head and never written down. The things he did describe in his notebooks and his sketches were pretty much seized by the military, I think the Navy in particular, branches of the FBI and other internal agencies, who seized them after his death in 1943 and most likely used them in the development of a number of covert and black projects, which were probably weaponized. So a lot of Tesla's potential was buried on the secret side of things, or just lost to time after his death, and his inability to be successful as a businessman and not just as a genius inventor.
Over the years, there have been multiple letters written to the FBI and released later in FOIA requests asking whether or not the FBI went through Tesla's room and confiscated his papers shortly after his death. This was a widely held belief because of a book written which claimed that right after he died, the FBI went in and confiscated all of his stuff. The FBI has repeatedly denied this claim. Every time somebody asks, does the FBI have Tesla's scientific papers, the FBI would write a letter back saying their files reflect that the effects of Nikola Tesla were taken into custody after his death by the Office of Alien Property and not by the Bureau, and since they did not participate in the handling of his effects, they're unable to supply any information about him. But going through these papers that the FBI released via FOIA request, there was one very interesting letter that stuck out. And that's this memo dated April 17th, 1950, which discusses a warehouse, a storage unit that Tesla had at the Manhattan Warehouse and Storage Company on 52nd Street and 7th Avenue in New York City. And they talked about how no one had had access to that storage unit except right after Tesla's death in early 1943, when an examination was made of his effects. Michael King, who was the floor supervisor of that warehouse floor where Tesla's stuff was kept for approximately 10 years, stated that at the time numerous photographs were taken by examiners. His description of the equipment used would tend to show that a microfilm reproduction was made of some of the papers of the deceased scientist. Mr. King also added that several of the group making the examination wore U.S. Navy uniforms, and during the 2 days required to complete the examination, the civilian assistants in the group were identified to him only as, quote, federal authorities. According to Mr. King, no other instance of microfilming of the records of Tesla has ever taken place since that time. This is the same time period that Albert Einstein was working as a part-time consultant to the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance. What's interesting about that date, 1943, is that later that year, the Navy was actually involved, widely believed, in the Philadelphia experiment, which supposedly happened on October 28, 1943, when the USS Eldridge disappeared at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Of course, the U.S. Navy denies this ever took place. This guy did change the world. Unfortunately, a lot of what he did was weaponized.
For a long time, he wasn't remembered here. They pulled this, they scrapped it, and Tesla was left out of the history books. I think it was only the advent of the internet that brought his memory back, and now our generation and younger generations, they know who Tesla was, but my parents growing up, me in school, we never had any idea what Tesla did or why he was important. We knew names like Einstein and Edison, but Tesla, well, he really opened up a whole new doorway that sadly has been weaponized and kept secret by a government and a para-government who've used it to control people instead of to free them. It was completely flipping the pyramid. But all this time later, well over a century later, in 2018, this company, Visiv Technologies, is actually trying to do this. People have talked in conspiracy threads across the internet about hidden history, about the things Tesla was trying to do, and now there are companies actually trying to achieve that in the real world, and they've built this tower, this very curious tower in Texas, that is either now undergoing or soon to be undergoing experiments in wireless energy transmission. And so Visiv Technologies describes this on their website. There's also entries in the Waco Tribune Herald about the partnership with Baylor University. They've got people working on this tower, and they describe how this tower works with a phenomenon known as Zenith surface waves to transmit electromagnetic waves along the interface of earth and air. And they describe it slightly differently here. It's the field of electromagnetic surface waves. And in a very eerie fashion, Visiv Technologies here in the 21st century says they're going to bring power to the planet and light to the world. They're going to be light bearers. Heard that before. And the thing is that the application of the use of these surface waves is virtually limitless. It could be used for communications, typical telecommunications, cell phones, internet, email, telephone, radio, but also for literal transmission of energy, actual power, to sensing, sort of passive electronics. And with the energy alone, I saw a special on PBS a number of years ago covering Tesla, his inventions, and the potential of them. And they talked about how even natural gas, it could be somewhere remote, say like Alaska, where they have a ton of it. And with some of these designs that Tesla came up with over 100 years ago, they could literally convert natural gas into an electromagnetic wave, transmit it either up into an orbiting satellite or across to another one of these towers, and downlink natural gas energy in somewhere remote, say Japan or an island somewhere or mainland United States, and bypass the use of really expensive, really controversial pipelines.
Microwave technology has already made it possible to transmit wireless power